My stepmother demanded I pay rent to live in the house, but when she found out the house was mine she was speechless. My name is Alex, and my life turned upside down in ways I never imagined. For as long as I can remember, it was just Dad and me. We lived in a modest house my grandparents left us when they passed. It wasn't much, but it was home. Losing Mom when I was 7 created a void we never fully filled, but Dad did his best. He worked tirelessly to provide for me and always made sure I knew I was loved. This year was supposed to be a milestone, my senior year of high school. I had plans to graduate, work part-time, and save for college. But those plans began to unravel the day Dad introduced Amanda. Amanda seemed nice enough at first. She was bubbly, friendly, and always eager to help. Dad's eyes lit up whenever he talked about her, and for the first time in years, I saw him genuinely happy. She came with baggage, though, 2 kids, Jake and Haley. Jake was a cocky 14-year-old who acted like he was already a man, while Haley, at 10, was sweet but clingy. It started small. Amanda would make suggestions about the house, new curtains, rearranging furniture, even replacing some of my grandparents' old things. Just to make it feel more like a family home, she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dad would nod, eager to please, while I bit my tongue. At first, I thought I was being too sensitive. Change was inevitable, right? But it wasn't long before Amanda's suggestions turned into decisions. Jake claimed my old desk for his room. Haley took over the den as her play area, scattering toys everywhere. Amanda started cooking meals that weren't exactly to my liking, but any protest was met with a patronizing comment about adapting to new family dynamics. Dad, oblivious to the tension, seemed thrilled by our new, blended family. He even suggested I take Jake under my wing, which was laughable considering the kid treated me like I was the outsider. They acted as if the house was theirs and I was just a guest overstaying my welcome. Things escalated when Dad got a promotion. It was great news for him, but it came with a catch: frequent business trips. He left for his first trip just weeks after Amanda and her kids moved in. Before leaving, he pulled me aside and said he was counting on me to help Amanda adjust. Adjust? The woman already acted like she owned the place. The first night Dad was away, Amanda called a family meeting. She smiled that same insincere smile and told us she had a few ideas to make things run smoother. She presented a list of new rules, ranging from chore schedules to curfews. The kicker? She wanted me to vacate my room so Jake could have it. It was bigger and better suited for a growing boy, she said. That night, lying in my bed, the bed I might not even have soon, I realized something had to give. The house might have felt small before, but now, it felt suffocating. Amanda and her kids weren't just taking over the space, they were taking over my life. Dad's happiness was important to me, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. Amanda's cheery facade was cracking, and beneath it, I sensed something far more calculating. I just didn't know how far she'd go, yet. The days following Dad's departure felt like walking on eggshells. Amanda wasted no time turning up the pressure. She started micromanaging everything I did. My workouts, which were my only escape from the chaos, were suddenly a problem. She claimed I was neglecting household duties and demanded I focus on chores instead. It didn't stop there. Amanda assigned me an endless list of tasks: cleaning, grocery shopping, even tending to the yard, while Jake and Haley lounged around, leaving trails of messes behind them. Dirty dishes piled up, wrappers were left on the floor, and every attempt I made to set boundaries was met with Amanda's icy dismissal. She insisted Jake and Haley were just kids and needed time to adjust. Adjust to what? Taking over my life? One night, after hours of cleaning up after them, Amanda called me into the living room. She sat on the couch, flipping through her phone, while Jake and Haley sprawled across the floor, arguing over a video game. She barely looked up as she announced that I'd need to start contributing financially. Apparently, she had discovered that I'd been freelancing online to save for college. She spun it as a necessary step toward adulthood, but her tone made it clear this was about control. My blood boiled, but I kept my composure. I asked her why Jake and Haley weren't expected to do chores or contribute in any way. Amanda's response was as dismissive as ever. She waved off my concerns, claiming that every family has its roles, and mine was to step up as the oldest. The breaking point came a few days later when I overheard Amanda on the phone with Dad. I was walking past her room when I heard her talking about me. Her voice was sweet but filled with calculated venom. She told him I was lazy, uncooperative, and spent all day at the computer doing nothing. She painted a picture of me as a freeloader, completely ignoring the fact that I was the one keeping the house running in his absence. Fury bubbled inside me, but I knew I had to keep a clear head. Confronting her would only give her more ammunition. Instead, I decided to take a closer look at the situation I was in. Something about the way Amanda was behaving felt calculated, like she was setting the stage for something bigger. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I rummaged through the desk in Dad's office. It was where he kept important documents, insurance policies, bills, and anything related to the house. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt compelled to dig deeper. That's when I found it. Among a stack of papers was the deed to the house. My heart pounded as I read through it. The house wasn't in Dad's name. It was in mine. My grandparents had left it to me, not him. All this time, I thought Dad was the one keeping a roof over our heads, but legally, the house was mine. The realization hit me like a freight train. Amanda had no claim to this house, but she clearly believed it belonged to Dad. Everything she'd been doing, the rules, the pressure, the lies, was likely based on that assumption. The question now was, how would she react if she ever found out the truth? The next morning, Amanda cornered me in the kitchen, her tone laced with authority as she demanded once again that I start contributing financially. She mentioned the household expenses and how we all need to do our part. But this time, I was ready. I looked her straight in the eye and told her I wouldn't be paying a single cent in rent. Her expression shifted, confusion mixed with disbelief. I pulled out the deed I'd found the night before and handed it to her. The house wasn't Dad's, it was mine. Amanda stared at the document, her face slowly draining of color as she processed what it meant. She tried to argue at first, saying there must be some mistake, but her voice faltered. Her confidence wavered even more when she called Dad to confirm. I could hear his voice through the phone, calm but firm, as he explained the arrangement my grandparents had made years ago. The house had been left to me to ensure my future. After the call ended, Amanda's demeanor changed. She plastered on a smile and started backtracking, saying it was all a misunderstanding. She assured me she only wanted what was best for the family and that we could work together to keep things running smoothly. But her attempts to smooth things over felt hollow, her true intentions now laid bare. Later that evening, I decided to set some boundaries. I gathered everyone in the living room and laid it out clearly. If Jake and Haley wanted to stay, they'd need to start pulling their weight. That meant chores, respecting shared spaces, and no more leaving me to clean up after them. Amanda's face tightened, but she didn't argue, at least not in front of the kids. Jake looked annoyed, while Haley seemed on the verge of tears, but I didn't budge. This was my house, and things were going to change. That night, as I was heading to bed, I overheard Amanda talking to Dad on the phone again. This time, her voice was hushed, but the walls were thin enough for me to catch fragments of the conversation. She was suggesting that Dad convince me to move out under the pretense of going to college in another state. She even floated the idea of transferring ownership of the house to someone more responsible, hinting at Jake as a potential candidate. My chest tightened as I listened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She was already scheming, trying to manipulate Dad into sidelining me from what was rightfully mine. I quietly stepped back from the door, my mind racing. Amanda wasn't done playing her games, and now I knew just how far she was willing to go to take control. The question was, how could I stop her before she went too far? The tension in the house had reached its breaking point. The morning after overhearing Amanda's scheming, I decided it was time to confront her head-on. I gathered my thoughts and made it clear that I wasn't going to tolerate the way she and her kids were treating me or this house any longer. I told her in no uncertain terms that if she and her kids couldn't respect the space or contribute fairly, they'd have to leave. Amanda's face twisted with shock and fury. She accused me of being selfish, of trying to tear the family apart. Her voice escalated, and soon Jake and Haley came running into the room, looking confused and scared. She played the victim perfectly, painting me as the aggressor in front of her kids. I held my ground, refusing to be manipulated by her theatrics. The fallout didn't take long to escalate. That afternoon, Dad called from one of his business trips. His tone was sharp, and his words cut deep. Amanda had clearly fed him a twisted version of the story. He accused me of being ungrateful and unwilling to adapt to the new family dynamic. He said I was the one creating division and demanded that I apologize to Amanda. It was like a punch to the gut. The man who had always been in my corner was now taking her side. I tried to explain my perspective, but he wouldn't hear it. Amanda's narrative had taken root, and I was the villain in her story. He said if I couldn't find a way to support the family, maybe it was time for me to leave the house and focus on my future. His words were clear, but they felt like a betrayal. That evening, I made my decision. I called Amanda into the living room and told her it was over. She and her kids needed to pack up and leave. She screamed, threatened, and tried every manipulative tactic in the book, but I didn't back down. I reminded her that the house was mine and that I had every legal right to make this decision. Her threats turned into pleas, but I had made up my mind. Jake and Haley looked stunned as they watched their mother lose control. Haley started crying, while Jake muttered something under his breath about how unfair it was. I felt a pang of guilt for them, but I couldn't let that change my decision. Amanda's behavior had gone too far, and allowing her to stay would only make things worse. By the next morning, they were gone. The house felt eerily quiet, almost too quiet. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Later that day, Dad called again. This time, his voice was cold. He told me I'd gone too far, that I had no right to treat Amanda and her kids that way. He issued an ultimatum: apologize to Amanda and invite them back, or he'd cut ties with me completely. His words hung heavy in the air, a final blow that left me reeling. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. The choice in front of me wasn't just about Amanda or the house anymore. It was about my relationship with my father and whether I could hold on to it without sacrificing my own sense of justice. The question now was, what was I willing to lose to stand my ground? When Dad returned a few days later, I felt a sliver of hope that maybe we could talk things through. But that hope evaporated as soon as he walked through the door. He was cold, distant, and had already made up his mind. Amanda had convinced him to move in with her, and he was here only to collect his things. I tried to explain what had happened, how Amanda had treated me, the way she demanded money and manipulated every situation to make me look like the bad guy. But he cut me off, saying he didn't want to hear it. His parting words stung more than I expected: if you can't accept my family, then you're no longer my son. And just like that, he walked out. For a while, the silence in the house felt unbearable. I'd spent so many years thinking of it as a home, a place filled with memories of my childhood and my mom. Now, it felt empty, like a shell of what it used to be. But I wasn't going to let it drag me down. I decided to move forward. I enrolled in the university I'd been dreaming about, packed up my essentials, and listed the house for rent. The income would cover my tuition and give me a fresh start. Letting go of the house wasn't easy, but it felt like the right decision. It was time to leave the past behind. University life brought a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't come with baggage or hidden agendas. I threw myself into my studies and found a part-time job that kept me busy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every decision I made felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. As the months passed, I realized how much lighter I felt without the constant weight of Amanda and her manipulations. The distance from Dad hurt, but it also gave me space to reflect. I began to see that family isn't defined by blood but by the people who genuinely care for you. It was a hard lesson, but one that brought clarity. One evening, as I was wrapping up an assignment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dad. The words on the screen made my heart race. "Amanda left me. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him sit with the consequences of his choices. But another part of me, the part that still cared, wanted answers. We met a few days later at a coffee shop near campus. Dad looked different, older somehow, like the past months had taken a toll on him. He apologized, admitting that Amanda had manipulated him and driven a wedge between us. She had taken what she wanted and left him when it no longer suited her. His regret was evident, but so was his hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. I listened, but I didn't let my guard down. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive just yet. Too much had happened, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. He nodded, accepting my boundaries, and we parted ways with a tentative understanding. It wasn't a clean resolution, but it was a start. As I walked back to campus, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. The boy who felt trapped in his own home was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to stand up for himself. The house, the conflict, even the estrangement from Dad, it had all been painful, but it had shaped me into who I was becoming. By the end of my first year at university, I had built a life I could be proud of. My grades were solid, I'd made new friends, and I felt more at peace than I ever had before. The future felt open, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. Looking back, I realized that strength isn't just about standing your ground, it's about knowing when to let go and move forward. The people who truly matter will stand by you, and those who don't aren't worth holding on to. My story wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wouldn't trade the lessons I'd learned for anything.